I thank you and welcome to the post-cabinet press briefing for the cabinet meeting held on Wednesday last. At this cabinet meeting, the government considered and agreed to a total of $5.4 million in additional supplementary appropriation requests that were made by the various ministries of government. And the estimates for the supplementary will be forwarded to the UK government for approval before being tabled at the next House of Assembly meeting, which is due sometime towards the end of November. As I stated, that the supplementary estimates total about 5.4, almost 5.5 million dollars in additional expenditure. However, the absolute figures are still subject to variations based on our interaction with the UK government as they review our supplementary requests. But the supplementary includes an additional $1.6 million for new projects, such as the school projects that is to come on stream later on this year. But an additional $602,000 to education, an additional $366,000 to the Deputy Governor's Office, most of which goes to the House of Assembly. Included in this was some transfers of accounts that were under other ministries like Government Support Services into the House of Assembly. Then we had a total of $576,000 to the Ministry of Health as part, the majority of it, towards the Ebola, chikungunya, and dengue fever preparedness and response activities. $488,000 to the Ministry of Finance, $377,000 to the Ministry of Home Affairs and Environment, and $990,000, almost $1 million, to the Office of the Premier, which includes the majority of it is a transfer or subvention to the Tourist Board to help support additional marketing of our destination, as well as marketing of airlifts into Turks and Caicos, Providenciales, and Grand Turk. And then $660,000 to immigration, and additional $700,000 in statutory charges and development fund. We also had an additional about $990,000 to the aftermath of Cristobal, which included the access to the contingency fund and recovery work and staff payment, overtime payment, with regards to Cristobal. So the government was able to approve the funding of these supplementary requests because of the strong fiscal performance which we experienced over the first half of this year in terms of revenue, where we saw almost $19 million in excess for the first half of the year, in excess of what was actually budgeted or what we expect to get. So as part of the government commitments as well, to do all that is necessary to facilitate development in the islands, especially in the lesser developed islands, Cabinet agreed to extend the development agreement currently in place with Grand Caicos Holdings to allow for the commencement of construction of a mixed-use hotel, marina, residential, and commercial development on the island of Middle Caicos. The extension will require the development to commence construction by the 1st of March 2015. And once this is executed, it will bring the much-needed work to the people of North and Middle Caicos in particular. The government has as its mandates the rationalization and simplification of taxes and the reduction of the tax burden on the people of these islands, which includes the removal of nuisance taxes, which the government had committed to from time we took office. Even though there were increases in tax initially for us to meet our revenue gap, we are now on the pathway, especially during the second half of our term, to reduce the tax burden by removing the nuisance taxes. So in keeping with this mandate, Cabinet approved amendments to the Domestic Financial Services Sales Tax Ordinance 2011 to limit the imposition of tax to money transfer only, to money transfer fees only, and to increase the rate from 10% to 12%. And so to be clear on this, this tax is on the amount that is the amount of fee that is charged by the bank or the money transfer company, and not on the amount that you're transferring. And so just to be clear on that, it's not on the amount, it is on the fee that the bank charges you to transfer. This also means that there will be no government tax, or otherwise called DFSST, on the various bank charges such as ATM, withdrawal fees, mortgage fees, and other bank fees such as documentation that you will see from time to time on your various statements and wondering what they are. So this will ensure that our ordinary citizen relieve of these particular taxes. This decision will, however, result in a government revenue shortfall of about $250,000, or otherwise we'll consider a tax break to the people. Also, in keeping with our mandate to lower the tax burden and the cost of doing business, Cabinet approved an amendment to the current business license fee structure on commercial rental space to reduce the fee from 50 cents per square foot to 25 cents per square foot. And the minimum amount payable will be $300 and the maximum $5,000. This will have the effect of making rental spaces more affordable and preventing significantly high business license fees without a cap for large square footage commercial space. The government continues to reduce the cost of business license as we move towards business licenses being more of a regulatory tool than a revenue generating tool, which will encourage growth of small business and efficiency of doing business in the Turks and Caicos Islands. The government also, in its commitment to the people with regards to the regularization of business license fees, has agreed in Cabinet that there had been an overpayment, where there had been an overpayment or underpayment of business license fees as a result of the early payment of business license renewal ahead of the implementation date in July this year, to refund and or to collect outstanding amounts made. So, and according to our records thus far, the government total refund payable by the government to the people is in order of about $131,000, whilst that owing to the government is around $16,000. So Cabinet also noted and endorsed the establishment of a multi-agency revenue compliance program to further strengthen the collection of government's revenue. Cabinet also agreed to amend the Hotel and Restaurant Taxation Ordinance 2014 to comply with the terms of Carnival's existing development agreement that relates to its operation on Grand Turk. This means that no new taxes implemented after the date of the agreement will apply to Carnival service providers or Carnival passengers on the island of Grand Turk. Therefore, the new extended tourism services tax will not apply to these entities. The new tourism tax comes into effect on November 1st, 2014, and the government will continue to enforce the collection of its revenue whilst keeping this new tax in particular, and its impact under review. The government, in its efforts to enforce the laws of the land that are currently enacted, continues to encounter a number of challenges at some of these laws. And we know that some of them, when once implemented, that were not implemented before or not enforced before, is counterproductive to business development. One such situation falls under the section 30 of the Business Licensing Regulations, which requires all investors in a business to obtain a work permit in order to do business in the Turks and Caicos Islands. We find this provision to be counterproductive to investment in these islands, and hence Cabinet has agreed to amend Section 30 of the Business Licensing Regulations to make it applicable only to persons who are ordinarily resident in the islands, to require them to have a work permit. The government has committed to the infrastructure development of the economy of these islands, especially the lesser developed islands of North Caicos, Middle Caicos, South Caicos, Salt Key. The development of South Caicos International Airport, in particular, is critical to the economy and growth of that particular island, as well as it will support the much needed necessary airlift to service the East Bay Hotel, which is scheduled to open towards the end of this year, and also the Sail Rock development, which is ongoing. Therefore, to facilitate this initiative, Cabinet has agreed that the Turks and Caicos Islands Airport Authority access revenue for the financial year 2014-2015 and 2015-2016, which becomes available upon completion of the Providenciales International Airport, should be used for the redevelopment of the South Caicos International Airport, which works we expect to commence in short order, hopefully before the end of this year. Cabinet considered also a number of recommendations submitted by the National Insurance Board for amendment to the National Insurance Ordinance and Regulations that will ensure the viability of the National Insurance Fund, improve service and benefits to beneficiaries, and to ensure the smooth operation of the board. Some of these amendments include as follows: increasing the maximum limits, that is the wage ceiling, on which contributions are paid from $2,600 per month to $4,000 per month in 3 steps, starting April 2015, April 2016, April 2017. So it will be a gradual increase up to that amount of $4,000 per month. Also made amendments for retirement pension. Use a 5-year average of insurable wages instead of only 3 years of insurable wages. And if the ceiling is increased as recommended above in terms of $4,000, to adjust downwards the average insurable wages for those with earnings in excess of the current $600 per week ceiling when you're calculating their pension. They also recommend the introduction reduction factors which will be applied to retirement pensions awarded prior to age 65, thus making pensions selected prior to age 65 actually equivalent with those awarded at the normal retirement age. I know most of that you'll have to go and really look at the impact that they will have on each particular person individually. It also made legislative provisions for the National Insurance Board to make all of its investment in accordance with the investment policy statement. Currently, they were not all in accordance, and we need to make sure that they're all in accordance with the investment policy statement, which is developed by the board in collaboration with the minister responsible. And to also make provision for the Permanent Secretary of Finance to be the ex officio member of the board and his or her representative to deputize in their absence. We're also looking to increase the maximum period for payment of the maternity allowance from 12 weeks to 14 weeks to bring it in line with the employment ordinance. And this is a welcome change, I know, for most individuals. And to also reduce the amount of hours from 10 hours to 5 for the purpose of determining the liability to pay contributions as a self-employed person. So there are many such benefits there are additional benefits or additional amendments that were recommended by the National Insurance Board. These will make available to the public with regards to what's being proposed, as these will be submitted to the House of Assembly to debate it and change in the House of Assembly in due course. However, the government also made recommendations to the National Insurance Board to take into consideration in its actuarial assessment to the increase in the non-contributory old age pension, which is much needed benefit to the people of the islands, especially those in North Caicos, Middle Caicos, and South Caicos, to benefit our senior citizens. So we've asked them to take into consideration. So that is something that we would like to put in place for some time next year. Cabinet has also agreed to the submission to the House of Assembly a validation bill that will retrospectively regularize the payment of various benefits that were paid to beneficiaries since 2004, for which legislation was not available. So those were some major and significant changes to both the ordinance and regulations that have been recommended by the board, to which Cabinet approved and agreed and will be implemented shortly. So I thank you for and open the floor for any additional questions you may have in that regard.
Could you speak further to the resort development on Middle Caicos? Could you say maybe who are the persons doing the development? How many people you think it may employ doing construction and then after opening?
I can't really give you that degree of detail without looking at the development agreement as it stands right now in front of me, but I know that the start is a boutique hotel. It consists of the marina. The boutique was around 50?
250.
Yeah. Right. So, and it will definitely employ more than the population of Middle Caicos, in North Caicos. And and if all of them are eligible to work. And that is the important part. It is a combination of both foreign developers. I think there are one or two local persons who are involved in development as well. But I'm not at liberty to give the names of those persons at this time.
Can you say what prompted the Carnival Cruise decision with the, I think it was a development?
No, it was part of Carnival Development Agreement that was in existence since Carnival came on board, and so it just we cannot apply. And since that was a new taxation measure, it then cannot apply to Carnival because their development agreement exempted them from any such new taxation.
Well, speaking about the tourism services tax, we received a letter a while back ago from 40 plus tourism service providers saying that, number one, the tax is going to affect their operations, gonna bring less business, and the fact that government is pretty much not hearing their cries. What do you have to say in terms of their concerns?
No, it's not that government is not hearing their cry. Government receive representation from anyone. No one likes to pay taxes. We all know that. The less tax you pay, the more profit you make. However, the government have taken into consideration their representation and their concerns. And as we stated, that there are many other things that they are paying as well, not other fees, and we'll take those into consideration before, and we need to give this new tax the opportunity to function and to do its job in terms of being an important revenue collector for government, while we remove some of the nuisance taxes that may be affecting those very same businesses. And so we intend to look more at that than to look at the new tax. If we were to back away from every representation made for every tax we implement, we will never have any kind of tax.
And no revenue.
They also
And
say
no
that there
revenue.
was no consultation. How has the communication been between government and the
I wouldn't say there has never been any consultation. There has been significant consultation, but whether or not persons will hear you or want to accept it, that's a different story. Sometimes people just don't want to accept what is being said. But there has been consultation. There has been adjustments and all since consultation, and we will continue to keep the new tax under review. And where there are challenges, we will indeed make adjustments, like we've been doing with the business licenses. And some of the changes we've made adjustments, and we'll continue to make adjustments to ensure that we have a tax that is simple, a tax that is a viable and sustainable revenue collector for government, and one that is not as burdensome on the persons who are being taxed. In this case, which is the tourists and the residents who purchase the services.
How many companies or businesses can we say we have in these sort of categories, and how much money do we foresee raising from this new tax?
I'll ask the Minister of Finance if he can remember all of the figures in terms of the revenue. But I think that the revenue that government anticipates that is budgeted to raise is way less than we are capable of raising, because it is, remember, this is a new tax that was never tested in our jurisdiction, and so we don't really know truly what the market is and to what extent persons who like use spa services pay, how often they use the spa services, what they pay, and so that's a totally new market. So it's very difficult for you to model the revenue, but we have an idea, a general idea, and that was placed in our budget as to what we hope and expect to collect from the tax.
Could you say where government? Oh, okay.
I don't know if you remember the fee off the top of his head.
First of all, it is not true to say that it was in consultation. We have a habit in this country of not turning up to meetings, not making our voices heard and not asking questions. The HTT was front and center of the sort of a dog and pony show, if you like, that was undertaken by me when I attempted to sell the payroll tax. So I think it's totally untrue that there was no consultation. That's the first point I'd like to make. The second point I'd like to make is that government is gradually, as a part of the whole tax rationalization plan, government is gradually moving towards a, like the Premier say, eliminating nuisance tax and moving towards something that represents some sort of a GST, General Sales Tax System.
Which everybody was asking about.
And that is why we have moved the tax from domestic financial services tax from 10% to 12%. This is by no means a new tax. This is an increase in money transfer, money that's literally leaving the country. The Premier went at length to explain, as a young person buying a home, or you currently are now paying on that the lawyer's fee that when you actually have a mortgage, that is gone. The ATM and all of those other small amounts that you show up on your bank statement, those would be gone, right? It just is focusing on the transfer of funds out of the country. Similarly with the issue of the ancillary tourism services, okay? They are now required to pay a 12% tax that is passed on to the guests consuming the service. So they themselves are not paying the tax. It's the guests consuming the service. Now I understand that that's, from the guest point of view, they only are concerned with what the cost is, right? But they have been consulted, and the Premier makes the good point that we are eliminating business licensing fees as you know it today. Come next April, those would be purely administrative fees. They would be significantly reduced. I can't say exactly how much they would be, but they would be a fraction of what they are now. So those services, those companies would get that relief. We can't do everything at the same time, but we're moving in a direction where we're eliminating taxes that creates a barrier for people to get into business, or at the beginning of the year, the first thing they have to do before they make a dime is to pay a license fee. So we're trying to move away from that and make it a lot easier for them to pay as they go by having these taxes spread out across a monthly basis from the proceeds of the business that is being run. I don't know if I answered the question, but did I?
I can't remember what the question was.
How much is gonna raise?
Well, I
Oh, the
think,
amount, yeah.
I think the amount we were going to raise was in excess of $1 million. I don't remember the exact amount, but I think I have to put it in context, because it's not always about the amount. It's partly about having a level playing field. Now, at the end of the day, there may be some people who currently getting away scot-free may find that they're gonna end up having to pay something, because when we drop business licenses, right, there are people who are paying some licenses fees now that are not paying anything else anywhere else. So we have to find a way that they pay too. Everybody has to pay their own fair share, you know?
Can I just say a couple of things? Not tax related, but very, very briefly. As persons would be aware, over the last few months, we've been discussing the splitting of the Clement Howell High School and TCIG constructing a new facility in the Long Bay Hills area. Unfortunately, the tender closed on Tuesday and not a single bid was received from any contractor in this country. Now, the reason why I have to raise this here is because we, as a public, are continuously hitting out on the government on what are they doing to tackle the overcrowding at the Clement Howell High School. We have made financial provisions to address this, and it's disheartening to see from the Ministry of Government Support Services update that the tender period now has to be extended by a further 2 weeks to November 5th because not a single bid was received for the project. As we said last time at the post-cabinet press conference, as we're here today, the phase 1 of this project has been budgeted for. Now, the increase that the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Government Support Services is seeking to have in the supplementary budget and not having the work tendered for will end up not being spent. And that would be a loss to government, loss to the people of this country, especially our children who are housed at the Clement Howell High School in desperate need of space and facilities. So I'm actually appealing to anyone out there with business licenses, contractors who may be interested in bidding for any government project, especially one from the Ministry of Government Support Services and the Ministry of Education, to please attend on the Public Works Department. If you're not in the islands of Grand Turk or Providenciales, see your district commissioners. They will have all of these documents. You can review them and see whether or not this is something you're interested in. If there's a further delay in the awarding of a contract for phase 1 of the new school, there will be no new school for September. And so we have to put the onus on those persons who can bring about this development, because the government does not have the capabilities to do so. And we will end up losing the funding that we fought so vigorously to secure in order to conduct this. Now, I preface this, I follow up by saying that phase 2 will actually be a lot more money attached to it, but phase 2 cannot occur unless phase 1 takes place. So the ball is in your court. Thank you.
How much will phase 1 cost overall? I know you said you were requesting additional funds. What's the total cost of it?
Roughly, we have so far $600,000 that we've budgeted for. If we get the slim increase that we've asked for during the supplementary, take it up to about $1 million. But you're allowed to only tender based on the tender documents as they are presently.
I'm not sure if I can recall, though, during the last press conference, I thought the Premier said that there were some engagements already taking place with bidders.
There was discussions, which always happens during tendering process. Interested tenders or interested bidders will come in, meet with the Public Works Department, ask further questions and information. And so that has happened. This isn't the first or a unique situation in which a tender process has happened in this case. And actually in the Ministry of Education, this is probably the 6th or 7th tender that we have had unsuccessful or no bids received. It's happened at the Raymond Gardner High School for their science lab. It's happened with the Marjorie Baisden School's bus. It's happened for the H.J. Robinson Auditorium. And so we're currently in a ministry where we're attempting to create space and infrastructure for our young people, but it doesn't seem to be as attractive as other projects may be that TCIG is currently funding.
Do you think it's the amount?
Well, the amount is based on the technocrats within the Ministry of GSS. They're architects, they're engineers, and they have the experience, and I believe the amounts are sufficient for what we're trying to achieve.
But even when it comes to amount, what you do as a bidder, you look at the scope of the work that needs to be done, and then you bid what you can do the work for, including what you want to make as a profit. And when the bid is evaluated, all the evaluators can say, okay, this is below the seam or above the amount that government had put in. And that happens all the time. People always sometimes overbid, underbid,
Or
bid the
underbid,
same.
yeah.
So having to submit a bid submission that is beyond what is budgeted for is not a deterrent to you actually submitting a bid. And so actually I don't think the people knows or should know what the bid is anyway. They should just look at the scope of the work and then bid based on what they think, not what they think, what they've calculated it to cost.
As long as it's reasonable, because you're gonna have the technocrats that review the tenders. So it's a full tender process, and you'll have the persons there with the expertise to say if Joe Blogg's construction that's bidding $3 million for what we're asking for, whether or not that's reasonable. It would be unreasonable in phase one, and that's why it's a design and build project, so that as you develop phase one, phase two, and phase three can be incorporated in the design. And as we've said continuously, in relation to this project, if the government was able to build the complete structure during one financial year, we would definitely do so. But we have to always be mindful that there are competing interests within TCIG and for the revenue that we have, that we all have to be fair to all concerned.
What will be constructed under phase one? What will we get under
Phase one, based on the tender documents or the documents that are out there, we're looking for 8 classrooms. This is to house Forms 1 and Forms 2. Phase 2 would house Forms 3 and 4, and phase 3 would house the 5th form as well as the various technical courses. As you know, the government is looking to introduce CVQs in the upcoming academic school year, so that would be next year, September. And so when UNICEF arrives next month to conduct their review of our current structures, we would then know the equipment that is needed in order to facilitate the full Caribbean Vocational Qualification course. And so that will be part of phase 3. That does not mean that works cannot commence at the current Clement Howell site to ensure that we have the facilities and the equipment necessary for the introduction of CVQs come September.
You mentioned the increase from 10 to 12% on the fees. Was this decision reached as a result? I know earlier this year the Financial Services Commission released the numbers on how much money is leaving the country. Was this reason reached
Has
as a
nothing-
result?
No, has no relationship whatsoever. The increase from 10 to 12%, as you know, we're trying to move to a stable tax rate across the board, and that was just to regularize and stable, as well as to reduce the deficit that we will have in revenue. Because as I said, in doing that, in removing that nuisance tax, we actually lost or forego $250,000 in revenue. But if we did not increase it from 10 to 12%, we probably would have lost almost $1 million. But 700,000 or thereabout.
About 600, about 650, $700,000.
We'll have lost. So just to regularize the rate, and as stated earlier, that the amount of money that's transferred has nothing to do with the tax rate, because even if persons who transfer money, they may transfer it in small amounts, but you don't pay on the amount transfer,
Just a fee.
the taxes on the fee. So the fee may be $50, then it's 10% or 12% of the $50 fee, not of the $2,000 or $5,000 that you
sent out,
transfer. Right?
So how soon will we see this relief?
That goes into effect. That's a regulation, right? The DFS.
The DFSS?
Yes, how soon will that disappear?
Probably beginning of November.
It's a regulation, so.
Beginning. I think there's a point here that's
Getting
Worth
lost in translation.
mentioning, though, that relates to I'd like to go back on the national insurance, because I think there's some good news in there that, I know the press don't like good news, but some good
No,
news.
I can't say that. I defend the press on that.
Hey, the good news don't sell.
It does not.
But, but the good news has to do with the fact that the Premier mentioned the bill that's going to the House to validate the National Insurance Validation bill. What has happened in 2004, the government made a decision to increase a number of benefits to the public, to contributors. Some of those benefits were encapsulated in subsequent legislation or regulations, and some were not. So since then, we've been paying those increased benefits without the authorization, or legal authorization. So we had two options, either to reduce them within legislative authorization or to validate them. And clearly it would be inconvenient to those people who are receiving those benefits if we were to reduce them back to where they would fall within the current legislation. So what we've done is we're bringing a bill to validate those payments that have been taking place over the years so that people can retain those benefits that they've gotten over the years, and they can continue to collect those benefits, right? Another issue that have the potential to be taken out of context, and that is the one the Premier mentioned about an increase in the contributory ceiling, that is the salary ceiling on which NIB contribution is based. It is currently at $2,600 a month. And since 2010, I think every actuarial report has suggested that the ceiling needs to be increased. And even so, we've had particularly private sector people who are now on pension and who are saying, well, who've come to and say, well, the ceiling should be increased because it means that when you retire, you get more pension. But also, it's important to have an actuarially based ceiling or threshold ceiling, I guess, to make sure that the fund is enhanced and can survive. So basically, what the government has done is taken the actuarial assessment, the recommendations of those assessments, and so we've decided over the next 3 years, starting April 15, to gradually increase the contributory ceiling from 2,600 to 4,000. That will take place in increments over the next 3 years. And there is a direct benefit from that. As I say, there's an increased, for those people who don't make that kind of money, and I hope there are a lot of them who do, that they wouldn't have to worry about it. For those people who make more than that, or they would only be paying on the 4,000, but that means that they would get an increased pension. Now, I understand that is being spinned in the social media as a tax increase. Right? That is very important to understand that is not a tax increase. It is basically a pension increase.
Alrighty then.
All right, if no further question, I would like to make an announcement to all that, we are now drawing towards the end of National Heritage Month. The last event is tomorrow, this weekend, in Blue Hills, which is the Providenciales leg of the National Heritage Month, which is the Maritime Festival. So we are asking everyone to come out in support of the Maritime Festival, where we will have sailboat races by the Heritage Federation, as well as the Sailing Association with their dinghy boat races, as well as demonstrations and lots of cultural activities and food. So come out and enjoy yourself. Live band music by two Ripsaw bands, Seabreeze and the Island Boys.
Yeah.
What time it starts, what time it ends? What time it start, what time it ends?
Oh, it starts at 10 o'clock, and it ends but around 6 o'clock and beyond.
Can you say what was your thoughts, actually, my last question, what are your thoughts on National Heritage Celebration?
I think the National Heritage Celebration, for the first one ever, it's a great start. I think a lot of persons got the idea of the theme and enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to next year when we can put even more resources and more committees and organization and everything towards it. I'd like to thank all of those persons involved, Department of Culture, Mr. Bourne and Barbara Lee and Angela Freitas and all of the committee members from the various islands who participated, as well as the schools, government schools as well as the private schools. I heard that the private schools had a great time with their own individual Heritage Day for that they display their activities in the various schools, and that is very commendable, and we will be working even more with the schools next year and getting the schools involved. I'd like to also thank Ms. Blight Clear, who assisted us tremendously in both South Caicos and the North Caicos and getting the students and chaperoning them in those islands. So it was a great Heritage Day, a great start, and I think, yes, in the churches as well, and the Gospel Pioneers, and they're performing again on Sunday afternoon. This is your last opportunity to hear them during Heritage Month at the Alice and Alice at 6 o'clock, I think, on Sunday afternoon, Shopping Plaza.